Okay, everybody. This is the backup tune-up in place of David Stein's How to Convince Your Boss That You Need a Data Warehouse. I think everybody here knows who I am. I didn't expect such a big crowd on such an early session. I actually didn't expect such a big crowd. All right, here's two more. Wow, we're really filling up.
Do we have any spots left?
Yeah, I know, right? You are aware this is backups and not warehousing, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is more of an advanced backup course. The basics are covered elsewhere, but right now we're going to take people who already know how to do backups, and we're going to teach you how to make them go from hours to minutes, or maybe even better, right? From hours to days in some cases. Okay, good. Somebody got that. Okay, so I've been tuning backups since about SQL 7.0, which I think is probably the first time you were actually able to tune backups. And there is no right or wrong answer for across different servers. This is one of those Camtasia things. And that's something that's always gotten me, is that backup tuning is a lot like query tuning. Not only is there kind of an execution plan that you can see on your backups, it's piecemeal, and you got to go to different places to do it, and you got to turn on different things to see it, and I'll show you that stuff today. But what works for one server won't work for another server, and what works for one database won't work for another database. So really, it's nothing that you want to tune the backup and say, okay, you don't want to use a test database and say, okay, I'm gonna tune this one and then roll these parameters out across my entire WAN, because you could do a lot more harm than good, right? Yeah, you're shaking. So anyway, after doing backups for a little while, like I said, you just kind of get a feel for what's good and what's bad, right? I can't tell you how long it should take you to back up your 1 terabyte database or your 5 terabyte database, but I do know that backing up 1 terabyte in 4 or 8 hours is really, really bad. Just kind of across the board, even on a single disk, taking 4 hours plus to back up a 1 terabyte database is horrendous. So you kind of get the feel for, for what's good and what's bad, right? You got to realize that when they designed the defaults for backing up databases, they designed them to be as minimally intrusive as possible, right? So they want you to be able to still do as much as you can on your system while you're backing up. So that comes with a price, right? That means it's using very few resources, it's pulling very little I/O, it's not reading very much. So it really it's really minimally invasive. Okay, for those of you that just came in, before you get settled, this isn't warehousing, this is tuning backups. There's a last minute change. Okay, just making sure. Wow, I'm growing in popularity.
Well, if they have better signs.
Yeah, I know, right?
You get here, go to this end.
Yeah, I know. They did the same thing to me. And apparently the UTD campus has no idea this event's going on, because
I got here and asked people.
yeah, the girl out front at the information booth, she says, well, what building are you in? I don't know. You've got information, not me. So she directed me to somebody else who couldn't tell me. I had to actually get on my phone and find, like you said, in the middle of the paragraph where it said the buildings were.
Well,
So,
the map, but I mean,
yeah, the map is useless.
I got into the right building, but it was.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. So yeah, I had a junior DBA from my last gig a while back call me and say that their database is at about 2 terabytes now, and it was taking over 9 hours to back up. And is that normal? But you used to be my junior DBA for like 2 years. Why are you asking me this question? We've had this talk many times, right? So evidently I had a really big impact on that shop. So today we're just going to talk about different ways to tune your backups. Boy, she's actually recruiting people in here now.
He works for me, so he knows.
Oh, okay.
She wants to make sure he gets here.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that he understands everything that goes on here. He should definitely pass his quiz.
Oh, okay. So are you in charge of backups at your place?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then there you go. You're in the right place. Okay, so one of the easiest ways, now a lot of the stuff, okay, some of the stuff I give you is going to be SQL 08 and above only, but some of the stuff and I'll say the bulk of the stuff is really available from 2000 and up, because I really don't think 2005. Yeah. So I really don't think that a solution, giving a tuning solution for only 08 and above is very reasonable, because even I still have almost 200,000 boxes in my environment. I mean, you know, if I can't tune 2,000 backups at all, then what's the point, right? So I'm going to say right now, the biggest bang you're going to get for your buck, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I have to go in order, right? In my head, the order changes every time, is compression. You will not get a bigger bang for your buck than compression. That's only available in 08 and above, so now let's talk about the other stuff, right? Other than compression, the biggest bang you're going to get for your buck is altering the different parameters. And one of the things that's going to do you really, really well is backing up to different devices. So I've got 2 files here, right? So the basics of how this works, right? Wow, this is going to be an interesting recording. Hi, this is backups and not warehousing. You know that, right? Oh, you're the cameraman.
But he's got a small server at home.
Yeah, fair enough. So what happens is, based on the number of files you have and the number of disks that you have and the number of CPUs and the amount of RAM and all that stuff, all the resource properties on your box, SQL goes and figures out how many buffers and and whatnot to use for your backup, right? So you can alter those. And one of the ways that you can alter those is by using multiple files. But multiple files also comes in a lot more than just the amount of resources. You're actually able to write the I/O more efficiently, right? Because you're writing to 2 separate files at once. You're actually doubling your I/O, right? And it's not that linear. I mean, if I use 2, I'll get double. If I use 4, I'll get quadruple. If I use 6, I'll get sextuple. It's not that linear. Sometimes it goes like this. Sometimes it goes like that, right? I mean, sometimes you can have you can double the number of files and it'll go up like that. But there's always going to be a point where you get that diminishing returns, right? So if I go from 20 files to 30 files, when I went from 10 to 20, it may go like this, and when I go from 20 to 30, it may level off and just barely give me any extra I/O at all, to where it's just not even worth it, right? So you will get that diminishing returns. And I will say that you can use as many files as you want. You are not restricted to the number of files as long as you stay under 64. Well, under 65, huh? So less than or equal to 64, then, and I tested that one time. I had a script that just generated disk equals lines, and I went all the way up to my number of CPUs on my big box, which was 96, and it said too many files. And I was like, too many files? And then I started backing it down to see how many it was, and then like on my 4th iteration of backing it down, I noticed that it said in the error message that you could only have 64. I was like, okay, fine. So, oh wow, he's really gonna. No, I'm kidding. I know, right? So, the biggest bang you're going to get for your buck outside of compression is changing the number of files. Now, do these number of files have to be on separate disks? Oddly enough, it really doesn't make that big of a difference. You would think that striping your backups, and that's what we call backing up to multiple files. We call it striping your backups. Striping your backups across multiple files gives you just as much, if not more, really, if not more than striping those files across separate disks. So it's really not that important. It can make a difference, but in the testing I've done and in the benchmarks I've seen from Microsoft, again, it's that diminishing return, right? When you do it on the same disk, your performance goes like this. When you do it on separate disks, as compared to this one, they really only it really only may improve slightly. So it's really, I mean, yeah, you can do it, but you're not going to go from like 200 IOPS per second on your backups using 2 disks and then putting them on 2 things. You're not going to go to like 400 or 600. You may go to like 205 or 210 or 220. I mean, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And most of the time, that's the matter of seconds, from the time you back up, right? The cool thing is I've done a lot of this type of benchmarks with all the third-party products that do the compression and whatnot. Back when the
I do have the question because we have the Redgate SQL backup.
Okay.
And it has a number of threads, but I mean it doesn't actually. I mean I always end up with a single file at the end, but I'm telling it to use X number of threads running out there. And when I look at the backups the process is running, it does almost look like it's going to multiple files, maybe behind the scenes, and then basically when it compresses them, it puts them.
No.
No.
No. That's not how SQL backup works.
Okay. All right.
So.
I was kind of looking. Maybe I was just understanding how each of those.
And how are you deciding how many threads to use?
Basically, I've
Guess.
been tweaking with the number of the processors and just playing with it to see performance.
All right. So how many threads does it use by default?
Actually, I think it comes up default as one.
As one? Okay.
And this is an 8-core machine, so I think I have it run like 6 right now.
Okay.
And that's kind of where it's kind of seemed to work the best.
Okay.
So I'm kind of just digging all the information you're going to give me to go look and see what kind of settings that will give me available to tune, because it builds that with disk, etc. with command.
Right. Okay.
So
So the amount of buffers that are being used, right, is one of the things I'm going to show you is how to tell how many buffers are being used by default, especially by SQL. I don't know about with Redgate, because with Redgate it tells you it's using 1, right? But if you want to compare that with a native SQL backup, you can see how many threads SQL would use on its minimal config. The photographer came in here and left there, and then went to the next door. Oh crap! It's the same room. So I'll show you how to see how many threads you're running, and we've got some.
That's the point. I need the visibility into it, because right now, if we facility had a power failure the other day, and we were concerned because the database came up in a suspect mode, and we're saying, oh god, I have to restore it. It's a 6-hour process.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So and we'll get into that. I was saying, okay, this looks like something I'd like to look at.
Right.
This part of the
Okay, well let's get into this then, shall we?
All right.
Okay, so backing up to multiple files, I'll go ahead and run this backup while we talk. I was going to go into a thing about, well, while we're doing that, a lot of the third-party vendors will publish their benchmarks against their competitors, and they do it in percentage. Well, we were 27% faster than these guys, and we were 17% faster than these guys. But when you actually run the backup against a similar data set, it turns out to be the difference of like 30 seconds or a minute and a half or something. Really, who cares? I mean, if you're talking about a full backup of a terabyte database and you run so-and-so percentage faster than they did, and it turns out to be like 45 seconds or 2 minutes, really, seriously? It's not that big of a deal. But the percentages really sound cool. That's why they publish them, right? So the thing that a lot of people have against multiple file backups. Okay, so that took 44 seconds. Now, will you stop that? Go all the way over there. Okay, good. The thing that a lot of people have against multi-file backups is that you have to keep up with all the files. I've never found that to really be an issue. It's not like I personally have to carry the files around and not drop them, right? So, if you've got one file with, a gazillion log files, if you've got a shop where you're taking, 10, 15, log backups every 10 or 15 minutes, something, right? You got to keep up with all those files too. So it's really not that big of a deal, right? So this box is small enough that anything we do today is not going to make a difference. I've done this session 3 times now, and nothing I do on this box makes any appreciable difference whatsoever except compression. Because this is a slow 4500 speed drive with like a single CPU and just a handful of RAM and everything. So anyway, it's about a 3-4 year old laptop, so you're not going to get much out of this. So this is all just fodder, right? So if you're on 08 and above and you're going to do your compression, you can set, and you don't want to change all of your backup routines, and you can go into SP configure and you can set the compression default to 1 so that they'll always be compressed, and that's really cool. Now we're going to start getting into, and I just wanted to give you an example here of what it would look like if you striped to multiple files. All the files have to have a different name, and but they can be in any location you want. I mean, you could have one of these on a network location. Wouldn't really advise it, but you could. You look something.
A lot of times I've had system where I try and specify a location that's on a network drive, just an emergency or something, to do a backup. And I guess 2005, for some reason, it wouldn't allow me or would give me the destination.
So I hear that, and the question is, and I'm repeating the question more for the mic than anything, the question is, a lot of times he's had problems running network backups.
It just wouldn't select, it wouldn't allow me to select that drive. It wouldn't show me, it only showed me physically attached drives. Anything that was mapped or...
You're doing it in the GUI, aren't you?
Yes.
We'll talk after.
Okay.
I should have done my basics session where I spend the first 20 minutes telling you not to use the GUI.
Well, and basically by you looking at it and specifying it, I'm sure it's...
Yeah, just whack, whack, wham, right?
Have you explained it in format yet?
I'm sorry?
Have you explained it in format
Well,
yet?
this isn't a basics class.
I'm just asking.
No, I wasn't going to today because those are basics. And
I don't usually do it, just asking.
okay, so let's get into some actual tuning. All right. So we're gonna take this. I think I need to delete this guy first. Okay, so we're gonna restore the database. I need to drop that database first. AdventureWorks. I hope, like hell, that I actually do have a backup. I do because I backed it up this morning. Okay, so I'll use the replace. I don't need the replace. Okay, so let's take that. Let's do the restore. Now, this is one of those things. 3004, trace flag 3004. Okay, actually, I need my outline because I'm supposed to be following a specific thing and I'm not. So what 3004 does is it gives you information on the internals that the backup is doing. And one of the biggest problems with restores, and you may want to check this on your server, especially if you're taking 6+ hours to restore, is instant file initialization. Wow, that's the first time I've ever gotten that right first. So I'm going to call that IFI from now on because I'm going to push my luck if I keep trying to say that. Does everybody know what IFI is? Okay, what that boils down to is whenever you create a database file, and this is at the OS level, right? It has to be what's called zeroed out. So if you create a 10 gig file, it's got to go in there and write 10 gigs worth of zeros in that file, all right? So what IFI does is IFI goes in there and says, just allocate the space, but leave it empty, don't fill it out. So you can take something that takes several minutes to allocate and turn it down to just a couple seconds, okay? And you can see how long this is taking to restore. What the hell, right? It only took 45 seconds to back up, and it's been going for 1:30 now, right? So when it's finished restoring, I'll show you how to tell what's going on, and you can tell if IFI is turned on, and if you're using it, and it's documented all over the place how to turn it on and how to use it. It really is. And I have no idea how long this is going to take to restore. This was I've rebuilt my box since the last time I did this, and I had my timing down perfect, and I knew how long it took to do everything. And now I'm on.
You can talk the perfect amount.
Yeah, exactly. But I was on XP before, and now it's Windows 7, and so I have no idea, and I don't remember how big the database was before. So I will go ahead and open this up though. Okay. So you can see here that we've got these two lines right here, and this is the direct result of using trace flag 3004, right? So you can see here I've got these two lines that it says zeroing, and it gives me the log file, and zeroing the data file, and it gives me a time, right? So I have no idea. Nope, still going.
So that's going to go out there and zeroed out to the size, is the declaration size that you specify in your create database. You know, where it says, I'm putting my log file here and the initial size.
Right. Well, it's going to be how big the data file is.
Okay.
So if you've got a data file that's a terabyte,
right,
okay, it's going to create a terabyte data file and zero it,
okay,
and then restore the database on top of it. Oh my God.
I think
right?
That's probably part of my issue there.
Right. It may be. And what I did to create this, and it's still going, geez, 3.5 minutes so far. And what I did to create this was I just went and I put 10 gigs. I just expanded Northwind to 10 gigs. And now we're just waiting. And all of that is empty space. Right? So that goes to show that with all of that, like, what is it? Just a few megs of Northwind.
You've paged out. Your top line. Probably one.
Yeah. So now we're just waiting, right? And I am running that with 50 buffers. And we'll discuss buffers in a couple minutes. So as soon as this gets done, we'll be able to refresh that log and see when that does. So basically what's going to happen is when you're done here, right, you'll look at the begin time of this and look at the end time, and you'll be able to see how much time you would save by not zeroing out your files, just by turning on IFI. And that's only available, I believe, in Enterprise and above. Is that correct? And IFI? Or is it standard now? Because it's changed in the versions of SQL. It's changed. IFI used to only be available in Enterprise and above, and now with R2 they may have dropped it down to standard. But
I think there was a additional limit.
I didn't think so either.
really?
Yeah.
I may be high.
I think it's part of it's an OS thing.
Sure. Because it's an OS thing. It's just that privilege.
Well, yeah, but you know.
Which I've been trying to PowerShell, but.
So, like you said, it's just an OS privilege. So it's really easy to configure, and there's tons of information out there on it.
Just need to know the letters IFI.
Yeah, I know, right? Just turn on IFI. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, so wow, we're still going. Okay, so we'll move on while that goes, right? So that's how you do it. Now, the one thing I'm going to warn you about is the log file. The log file always has to be zeroed out. There is no way to get around that. So the IFI is only applicable for the data file. So if you have, and this is one reason why when they say, when a lot of the experts, other experts, because I'm one of them, when a lot of the other experts say, you know, keep a lot of empty space in your log file so you don't have to auto grow it, right?
Six, one half dozen the other, right?
Well, that comes with a cost, right? If you do have a failure and you do have to restore your database, well, now you've got to take all that empty space and you've got to zero it out. So it's going to greatly slow down your restore because you have to zero out, you know, a few dozen gigs of log file, and there's nothing you can do about it. No matter what you do, you cannot keep that log file from being zeroed out. Okay, it has to do with the way they read the bits when they start replaying the logs. Okay, they actually rely on those zeros being there. Wow, that's still going. So
Shrink the log file before you move back to the
maybe, yeah. You know, you have to find a medium in there somewhere, right? I mean, I always let mine grow a gig at a time. I've never really had a huge problem with that, you know, being really detrimental in performance. But
Our problem is right in the middle of the day, we're really very heavy transaction oriented, and if it goes out for some reason, it has to go ahead and say, okay, extend. We kind of get, is that not blocking? I mean, it's disk IO.
it's disk IO, and it doesn't really block, but it is disk IO, right? But I think a better way to manage that is to keep your log, I mean, give your log a couple, you know, between 2 and 5 gigs of extra space, right? And then rely on your log backups to keep that log flushed out as best you can, so that you're just reusing the portions of the log that you've already got, rather than extending it out.
Probably a basic question. Do you have a rule of thumb for growth sizes? I mean, databases X size.
Not on databases X size,
I mean, log files grow.
but I like to grow all my files at a gig.
Just 1 gig at a time.
Yep. That's a good rule of thumb. Some people say 500 megs. The official rule, I say the official rule, but the recommendation given down by Paul and Kim at SQL Skills has been 500 megs to a gig.
Okay.
So I always go a gig. That's a good round number for me. But the default from model, right, is 1%.
Yeah.
Or 10%. It's 10%, and it's 1 meg for data files. Really?
Ting.
Yeah, I know, right? You're just nickel and diming me now, right? So anyway, you'll always see a long log zero time, but the data file, you should be all right. And that's still going. Y'all mind if I stop this, because it's really holding things up?
I understand. I understand. It's taking a lot.
Yeah, compare the times and you'll be golden, right? So what I did there was IFI, you can't you can't turn it on and off as it is. You have to manage the OS permission and then restart SQL because it only checks for the permissions once. But you can't turn it off, and that's what this trace flag did. 1806 was it turned IFI off, right? So now let's make sure that this database is dropped, just in case. And now let's go ahead and turn 1806 off, and we'll go ahead and do our restore again. And hopefully that restore will happen a lot faster. Oh, I got the files there, so I'll just do the replace, and we should be golden. Now, this should happen in about under a minute, right? And here I talk about how IFI is there. And I'll make all this stuff available online. I'm recording this session, so you can go up to midnightdba.com, and within just a few days, I'll have this up on the events page. I know. Well, actually, I told them that at SQL Saturday, wherever I was in Baton Rouge last week, and I got home and I put them on my box and started compiling those videos, and my motherboard went out right then. And so last night I finally got my box rebuilt, so I'm going to start doing that. Well, it's not completely rebuilt, but I did get my motherboard put in and everything, and then my OS wouldn't boot, and it wouldn't repair, and it wouldn't system restore. So I'm like, really? So I got all that worked out now, and I'm copying files over to make sure I don't lose anything before I actually do my full thing. But yeah, not by the end of this week, but maybe by the end of next week. He holds his breath. Okay, so, and that's the thing. I said in under a minute. I have no idea how long it'll take because backup time does not equal restore time. It never does, right? So, this is the first time I've done it on this box. So now I'm going to clear all the flags. I'm not going to, well, no, I have to restore that database at all because the rest of them rely on it. So, so I'm stuck restoring that database. Now, I'll say that 3605, wherever it was, when I was up here, there it is. So I turned off 1806, which effectively turns IFI back on, right? It actually turning IFI off. 3605 sends the output of 3004 to the log. But if you send the output of 3004 to the client, which is here, which is what we're going to do down here, as soon as I get this database restored, you'll see completely different results by sending this to the client rather than to the log. Yeah. And that's if this ever restores. Man, maybe I should have run through a restore first. So now we're just waiting and waiting and waiting.
Are you mentioning file system permission turn on IFI?
Mm-hmm.
Is that too basic to?
The file system permission is manage volume system tasks or something like that, right? I forget the exact name. Manage volume tasks, something like that. It's in local security settings. And all you have to do is make sure that the service account that SQL is running under has those permissions.
Okay.
And you're good.
Restart SQL.
Yeah, well, you know.
Our facility did that for us the other day.
Oh, okay. Oh, you know what? Oh, I know what the problem is. This is the first time I've ever given this talk on this box, so I haven't set up IFI and Windows on this box yet.
Take it off. I can
So-
see how you did it.
Yeah, sure. I'll do it for you. Absolutely. That's the problem. I've been sitting here going, why is this taking so long?
It's behind the scenes laughing. Saying,
So local security policy, and I don't even know.
Finished.
Oh, good.
It's 24 seconds.
Yeah. So 324, good. So here's the permission you need. I'm not going to be able to set this up now. I may or may not have. I don't know if this is user rights. There we are. Perform volume maintenance task. That's the one. Yep. And it's set to administrators, so I should be in there. But it depends on what I've got SQL running under. But that's the permission you want. Okay, so we'll just assume all of the things from here on out. We won't actually run any restores. So, and that's a shame because, well, no, I can back up with that. Okay, so now we're going to turn off all of those just to make sure that the slate is clear. And now we're going to turn on 3004 and send it to the client now. So we're going to be able to see it in our window now with 3604. And I'll back this up again. And we know for a fact, we've done this before, that it takes about 45 seconds to back up. So there will be no surprises here. Now, buffer count. These are, a lot of these flags are the ones that we're going to use to find the buffer info. And we're going to do that next, because here in this restore, I've got buffers equal 15. And I'll tell you a story about that while we're waiting. One of the first times I was tuning, when I first started tuning databases years ago, I learned about buffer count, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I turned on my buffers to, and I used 10 buffers. And I was like, and it should have increased, but it actually decreased. It actually increased the amount of time that it took me to do the backup instead of decreasing it. I was like, okay, so I took it to 15. And that wasn't, it was a little bit better, but not much, but it was still less than the default. And I was like, but what the hell? I mean, I'm increasing the buffers it's supposed to, right? And then I found the trace flag that I'm going to show you next. It shows you how many buffers it's using by default. And it was using something like 30 buffers by default. So I was decreasing it. So you've got to know what it's doing by default. Remember I said that it's set with a minimal config, right? So you got to know what it's doing by default before you can tune it, right? Okay, so here's the info you get when you run 3004 and send it to the client. You can see it's vastly different information than you get in the log, which basically just tells you about zeroing out files, right? So, and I'm not really sure why the difference of information. Now, this isn't going to tell you anything other than the different operations that SQL goes through to do a full backup. Nope. And that's really kind of disappointing, right? I've been meaning to, I know the program manager for the backup team, I've been meaning to ask him why they don't give us more information. Yeah. Dude, give us a real execution plan, right? I mean, instead of kludging it together through different trace flags. But, so, okay. But you can just see the different things that it does here, right? You can see here that it's clearing the differential bitmaps. And if you know anything at all about differential backups, then you know what I'm talking about. Sorry, that's part of the basics class. And so you can see all of the different types of things that it's doing here, and you can see the number of database, the DB reader count here. So that might be useful for you. But just in case you wanted to know some of the stuff that it's doing, then you can see the order of operations that backups take. Now, oh yeah, we're definitely not going to restore, but I will turn off those trace flags because I want to reset everything. Now for 3213, this is the one that's probably going to give you the most information you need when you're backing up. So I'm going to back up again. And you notice here I'm sending it to the client, 3604, right? And trace flag 3213. And this one right here, this is where you're going to tune your backups from the most. And we'll wait our, prerequisite, 30 more seconds.
It was 32. Can you scroll it down just a second?
13.
32, 13?
Mm-hmm. And good, we're coming to the end here. Good. Okay, you can see by default that SQL uses 7 buffers on this particular server and this particular database. Remember, it has to do with the number of files and the number of disks and the number of resources and everything, right? So even if I did it on, if I'm doing it on a real server and I do it on 2 different databases that have 2 completely different configs, I could get a different buffer count, okay? And it tells you the max transfer size, and that's going to be important here in a minute, right? And the min transfer size. Now, the max transfer size, how you figure that out, I never keep it straight, so I have to look up my thing here. So, for databases that are under 10 megs, the max transfer size is 64K, and for anything on Express. Other than that, it's a meg. Okay? That's easy to remember. I don't know why I can't remember it. File system I/O alignment. Now that gives you some really good information right there on your partition alignment, and that can be another clue as to why you're taking so long to back up and restore. Okay? Right. So anybody know file partition alignment? Right? Okay, it's a really cool thing, right? That's unfortunately a completely separate course, but if you look it up on the internet, and you can find this information in the Win32 disk partition WMI class through PowerShell as well. That was for you in the back.
Most of the current stuff, current OSs do that for you.
08 and above does it for you, but
2003 does not.
But two caveats to that, right? Number one, anything that was on an 03 box that was put up on 08 isn't reformatted, right? So if you upgrade a box, right, then you've still got the old partition formatting. And depending on who's doing it, who your disk team is, they may be okay for now, but then they may switch to some third-party tool that does the alignment for it. And I've seen some of those tools that override the default 08 partition alignment, the starting offset, and they put their own starting offset. And most of the time they do that, they do it at 32 instead of at 64 or 1 meg. So always check anyway, right? And you notice this is just a client OS that I had nothing to do with, so it's at 512. Psh, that's a bad alignment, right? But it doesn't really matter because I've only got a single disk, so who cares, right? But if you're on a server and you're on an array, that really matters. So definitely.
Like I was doing one the other day and potentially selecting 64K instead of taking the default because the 2008 R2 box is the same drive.
Right,
So
now.
how does that play in if it's the same drive?
Now you're talking about the difference. The question was when you formatted, you chose 64K, right? Right. I'm talking about starting offset and not block size. Okay, block size matters, and 64K even on a SAN is what you want to choose, right? But I'm talking about starting offset for the array. Okay, look it up. It's called disk partition alignment. Jimmy May has a big blog post and white papers and stuff on it, and explains the whole thing in full. Okay, so this is when you're setting up the partition itself before you even format it.
Right.
Okay.
But I was just like, even with the block size and stuff, is there anything funny that the same guys do on the back end that would?
Yeah, most of the time they choose the default of 4K.
But even if you're formatting and setting 64K block size, is there anything that they can do that you really told it to?
No. Your block size is your block size. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Because they do lots of fun.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, you're right. They can. But if you format it in Windows, because that's a Windows thing at that point, and the SAN really doesn't really.
Those guys have been screwing me for about 2 months now.
Yeah, no. Always use. I want to say always use 64K block size, but that varies. If you look at a post Wes Brown did a while back, he shows you how to monitor your I/O usage patterns and come up with the exact block size that you should have. But your I/O usage pattern can change, and then you're screwed, right? So I think while scientifically that's a fabulous exercise, 32 or 64. 64 has always been the best catch-all there is. I mean, better than 32, but certainly don't use the default of 4K when you're formatting a drive. That's just ridiculous. So you can get some really good information here, right? And moving right along because we are running out of time. So the buffer size, again, the buffer count, you always look at 3213 first to see what you're doing. I always start by doubling it. Doubling it has almost always never been bad, and it always gives really good performance, right? But then just monitor it. You will come up with the diminishing returns, right? There is a formula for figuring out, I don't think I have time to get into it now, for figuring out how much memory you're going to take. It's like the buffer count times the amount of times the max transfer size, right? It's the number of bytes it's going to be, and then that's how much RAM you're going to take up during your backup. So you need to keep that in mind, right? And keep in mind too that everything that we do here is with the huge caveat that this is backups, right, and not warehousing. Okay. Well, it doesn't matter because it's towards the end anyway. keep in mind that everything we do here, this is all theoretical. And by theoretical, I mean there's always how fast you can get your backups, right? So I can use up 100% CPU and 100% memory to get my backups down from 2 hours to 10 minutes. And that's not unrealistic at all, really, right? But then you've got processing to do still too.
Your database is down.
Right? Your server's down, right? I mean, you're not doing anything else but backing up, right? For 10 minutes. So if that's acceptable to you, right? So very rarely do you get a chance to back up a database as fast as you can possibly back it up, right? You almost never get that chance. But where do you get the chance to open this up wide open?
When you're restoring.
Absolutely, when you're restoring.
When you're
Almost always you can open up the floodgates and say, just restore this as fast as possible, because the server's down. Unless you're on one of those that has 3,000 databases on it, and then you kind of have to tone it down some, right? But yeah, on your big systems, don't be afraid to open this wide up and use 100% CPU and 100% memory and just flood those gates and do everything you can. You'll restore in 15 minutes and you'll be back up and you'll be a god, right?
You show us how to
Well, yeah, that's what we're doing here.
Right.
So,
That's what I'm saying.
we're going to turn off 3213. I believe I've still got the other one on. So now we're going to go with 3604 and 3001. Well, actually, no, we're not. There's no reason to do that. So what 3001 does is it just says all of those backup tables that are in MSDB that tell you how all of your backup information. It just says don't write those.
Okay.
Sometimes you don't want that very often, but every now and then I've come across people that say they don't want it. So. Let's go ahead and use 3014 this time. Boy, don't you love the way they just make us kludge this together with different trace flags and different. It's like, really, guys? You can run all of these one after another in a single thing, but you have to really search through a long list of results like this, right? And this won't give you tons. Which one are we doing? 3014. Yeah, it just gives you some internal info that probably won't mean much to you. But I want to show it to you anyway so you know it exists. I'll wait for that and then we'll move on. Okay, so compression. Here's a nice little query you can use to see how much your compression is, how much good you're getting out of your compression. I'll show you how much you're compressing. And that'll be online, right? You can pull that outline. So just some info here. Like I said, a lot of it's really deep kind of stuff that even I'm on some of this stuff. Even I'm still pulling. I'm still polling the backup team to see if they can tell me if I can really use this. You can see here it just gives you a bunch of stream information and it almost always tells you how many megs per second. So here and just don't let me go past 955 before I want to show you a real tuning session and show you how it's really done in practice, right? Because right now we're just going through a bunch of flags, right? So let's see if I can get any information out of this guy. I should. There we go. So I've got my compression rates, my backup elapsed time, my percent compression, right? So my compression ratio. So you can see more or less how much your backups are being compressed. So you can run a couple tests and say, hey boss, we need to start compressing all of our backups because look, we can save this much disk space based off of that, right? Now a note on compression. It has been noticed by several people that the compressed file size is larger and then shrinks. Okay? So it was noticed by somebody in the user group when I first taught this session. He said, well, I've noticed that the backup file size, say if I have a 500 gig database, the backup file always goes to 500 gigs and then back down. And how can you call that compression if I have to have the 500 gigs first? No, it doesn't go to 500 gigs. I don't know where he saw that, but it doesn't. The way it works is it goes to 1/3 the size of the database, okay, and it gets that from the SP space used allocated extents, right? So if you want to really maximize your performance on that side, right? Minimize the space required, then you can get back all your free space, and update space usage and shrink that down and deallocate a lot of those extents, and then you'll have a lot more accurate size, right? So the reason they did that was because growing the file one little bit at a time as it needs, right, can be expensive, okay? So they go to the third of the size of and they just picked that number, right? They did a little bit of benchmark and said, okay, we'll go to a third, right? But they did do that at the beginning when they first started compression. When they were in the early beta stages, they went to the size and then all the way back down. But that really hurts performance. It really does, especially on network backups. So they go to a third of the size and they fill it up, and then whatever's left over between, they just chop it off, right? And there are some complaints that, well, if I had that kind of space, the reason I'm compressing is because I don't have that kind of space, right? So that you may be compressing for space instead of for performance, which is perfectly reasonable, in which case you don't really want that extra file space. You only want the file to be the size it's going to be, right? And those third-party tools are really good at that. They do, that's what they do, right? So if you run, and I don't have this in here, this is just me telling you this, if you run your backups under trace flag, oh God, I forgot it now, 3640, I think it is. If I get that wrong, come and shoot me afterwards. But if you want my email afterwards, then I'll tell you. But I think it's 3640 or maybe 30. The numbers are too many trace flags. It will turn off that behavior and it will grow the file as needed. So you'll see a performance penalty. But if space is your issue, and I'm thinking now it's 3046. That's what it is. 3046, or is it 42? I know, right? And I knew it. I was playing with it earlier today, and it's out of my head now. But anyway, I think it's 3042. But that'll turn off that 1/3 sizing, and it'll just grow the file as necessary. So now, backing up the database to null. I know, right? The guys that have been here before, that have seen my session before, know what this means. The null device, it's an operating system device, right? So what you want to do is you always want to start your tuning sessions by backing up to null. Because what null does is it reads the database, and when it sends it to the OS, it marks it as a write to the database. So SQL thinks it wrote, but the OS just throws it away. It doesn't do anything with it at all. It just dissipates into the ether and doesn't go anywhere.
So you can see how much your disk is actually impacting the writing.
Right. Well, so you can see the theoretical maximum of how fast you could back up.
If you're ever waiting on disk.
Right. This is how fast you can back up.
Okay.
And that's going to be in megs per second.
Okay.
Right? So what you want to do is you want to look at the megs per second for this, right? And I'll show you this one. And this will take, 30 to 45 seconds. I don't know. Anybody want to sing a sea shanty while we wait? No? Okay. So the fastest I could back this up is we'll round that off to 38 megs a second, right? So you'll know, and like I said, you're not going to ever be able to get this on your backups, but on your restores, you want to get as close to that as possible, right? So you want to do a theoretical restore as well, right? Well, you'll want to restore as fast as much. So 38 megs a second is where I want to go. Because how do you know when you've gotten there unless you know how fast you can go, right? So, and I'll go ahead and show you, yep, it's time to show you that real tuning session now. This is an actual tuning session that I did for my 96 core box, okay? And this is the same tuning session info that I send to companies when I do contracting work to tune their backups, when I teach companies how to do backups and whatnot. This is the exact same report when I do, I've done some stuff for Redgate, for SQL backup, and for Lightspeed and everything. I've benchmarked all of their stuff. And this is a very similar report to what I send them. And there is no intelligent way to do it other than trial and error. right? You look at your results. So with a single file, I backed up in 1 hour 9, and I had 128 megs a second, right? Now this is on a huge box, 96 cores, half a terabyte of RAM, a huge SAN behind it with like 200 disks, right? Now that wasn't the backup disk. I think the backup disk only had like 25, right? But look at that, 128 megs a second. That sucks, okay? Adding 3 files took me to 161 megs a second. Now you can see, again, that's not linear, right? That's not I mean, you would think that I would double, right? So it's not a linear growth. 12 files and 50 buffers, because I don't remember what the default buffers was. I should have recorded it up here. But 12 files and 50 buffers took me to 201. And by the way, from my null, my theoretical limit was like 658, something like that. So in the neighborhood of 650 megs a second. So that's what I'm trying to get to. So you see here, all I do is try different transfer sizes. Now that's something we didn't talk about. The max transfer size is the amount of data you're going to write to that file at a time, right? So it defaults, remember I said, to a meg for anything that's not express and is over 10 megs, right? So it's a meg. You can go from a meg to like 4 megs in increments of 64K. I've always found that 1 meg or 2 megs is the sweet spot. Mine are at 2 megs right now, I think. And if you go to 4, it's usually just way too taxing. I've never gotten anything but poor performance out of that, right?
And that's on max transfer.
Yeah, yeah. So even on a big SAN, max transfer size of 4 megs, it's just too much, right? And plus, if you multiply that by the number of buffers, it increases your amount of memory exponentially, right? I mean, that's horrible. So 1 meg is really good. On some of them, I've gotten better performance out of 2 megs, and you have to specify it in bytes, right? When it reports it to you from 3213, it gives it to you in megs, right? Or it gives it to you in K, right? But you have to specify it here, you know. So whatever. I'd like to get with them and get those little inconsistencies ironed out. But that's in increments of 64K. So you see here that I just keep increasing the max transfer size and the buffers and the number of files until I reach some sort of diminishing returns, right? And I get that right down here where you can see that I'm really not increasing as much as from 16 files to 20 files, I barely went up at all. I mean, that's nothing, right? That's still 543. Now we're just arguing over milliseconds, right? That's nothing. So from 43 to 48, that's a little bit of a bump. And that's going from 16 to 20 with buffers, right? But you notice how I've got my 4 meg transfer size here too, right? And I've got 20 files at 2,000 buffers. Now remember, I got half a terabyte of RAM, so I got plenty of RAM to spare. Went to 556, and then from 2,000 buffers to 3,000 buffers, I only went up 2 megs a second. So you can see that's definitely a diminishing return. It's not worth the extra memory it's costing me, and it didn't increase the time by much. The time is, I'm using tons more memory, and I only increased it by 3 seconds. Big deal, right? So you're going to find a sweet spot in there somewhere, right? And this is and I have no guidance for you other than try different ones until you reach something like this that that is going to you're going to notice greatly used resources and only a little bit of improvement, and then you've reached your sweet spot, right? And of course, when you reach maximum CPU of 100 and you've maxed out your memory, right? Then that's your other hard limit there. You can't go any faster, period, right? So there's some other stuff, but I think we're running low on time.
Interject one question.
Sure.
If you're talking CPUs, machine, just say a 4-core machine that has ability to do hyperthread, do you recommend turning on the hyperthreading or not?
Okay, so wow.
6 of one, half dozen the other.
Yeah, so the hyperthreading discussion is that's another discussion altogether. In general, no.
Don't turn on hyperthreading.
Don't turn on hyperthreading. In general. That depends on your database application. I mean, I'm going to say you should test it with hyperthreading per application, right? If you've got a bunch of databases on the server, then no, because it's you just don't know, right? But hyperthreading in general doesn't play well with databases. There are some exceptions, but not knowing anything about an application, not knowing anything, I would say don't turn on hyperthreading. And if you happen to be one of those that's lucky enough to turn it on later on and find out that it does give you some improvement, good for you. But don't count on seeing it again anytime soon.
Well, one caveat I think I learned on that is we had it turned on, we installed SQL, and we played with the affinities, and then we turned it off. SQL didn't like that because all of a sudden processors weren't there for the affinity or something we couldn't.
Well, for one thing, hyperthreading isn't thread safe, right? So that gets dangerous because other threads can be overwritten by other threads and they can be taken over. So it's not thread safe. So that's one reason not to use fibers. That's what we call that in SQL, right? When they say turn fibers on, right? So it's not thread safe.
Okay.
So, but also it's a shared cache thing as well, and so you usually spend more time and effort, more resources managing that cache than you do actually doing something with the fibers. But every now and then you come across something, like I said, that benefits from that. Yeah, but like I said, if you don't know,
It's off.
then off.
I just went through testing and just didn't see the benefit on it, and basically had a couple people go out there and say, we don't recommend it with
Yeah.
SQL. So
Yeah, they're right.
just want to make sure.
Yeah, and if you hear conflicting views, then the other side of that is
We'll call
people.
you, and you'll tell me which one. Tell me how crazy you are.
Yeah. No, if you do see conflicting views, then it's from people that have had experience with applications where those edge cases, right, where it is useful. So I never say never, but I will say more likely than not.
Okay.
Cool. Anybody else? No? All right. Get out. You don't have to actually get out.